Assalamualaikum and very good morning. My name is Hizam Kadir and you are watching ORBIT Talk series, streaming live to you from the ORBIT Fintech Hub here in Bangsar South. We are very extremely fortunate today to have a very special guest, a lady with an illustrious career at Bank Negara Malaysia, the first woman to be appointed governor and now chairman of Permodalan Nasional Berhad. Yang Berbhagya Tan Sri Dr. Zeti Aziz, welcome to ORBIT Talk series. How are you, Tan Sri?
Good, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. I'm just very humbled, very honored to have this opportunity to be speaking with you today. And we've been gathering and accumulating questions from our friends in the industry. And all of us want to hear your views and insights on the current economy, the process of recovery, as well the much talk about, and we are coming from MDEC, it has to be on digital transformation. Maybe we begin with the first question, Tan Sri, and we'll talk about what's relevant currently with the pandemic. How do you view, and with your experience in the economy, the current economic impact from the current pandemic, and how does that very much different from the financial crisis, especially in the mid-90s?
Right. Well, this is a question that is in a lot of people's minds. How has this pandemic affected the world and our own economy? Well, the world was not in a state of preparedness. This pandemic was not anticipated, and therefore they were not in a state of preparedness to deal with it. And in terms, well, this crisis first is a health crisis, and the first objective has to be to contain its spread. And as a result of that, there were economic shutdowns throughout the world, and this shutdown has had a major immediate effect on economies around the world. And this has become a health crisis, and then it translates into a humanitarian crisis because people's lives have been affected by it, and then an economic crisis all at the same time. And as a result of the shutdowns that were taken throughout the world, economic shutdowns, it has resulted in no economic activity, and this translated into an economic crisis, and most countries around the world have seen a major economic contraction in the first half of the year.
Yep.
Now, we can then say that given the reduction in the restrictions on movement and resumption of economic activity that has taken place, that now there is economic activity taking place. However, although we can say categorically we've seen the worst now, and that we should see a recovery happening in the second half of the year, and going into next year with a stronger growth. However, all this is on the assumption that we don't have a second wave. So the first objective of any policy is when we see some sporadic clusters emerging, these need to be contained immediately so that we do not have a second wave of shutdowns and then further economic setbacks. One of the main consequences of this is also the higher rate of unemployment.
Exactly.
So while there has been a resumption in economic activity, it's not commensurate with the recovery in employment. And what is of concern is the high rate of unemployment amongst younger people, and this is of great concern. So if we ask the question, how is this crisis different from the crisis we experienced 20 years ago, exactly almost 20 years ago, 22 years ago to be exact, in 97 and 98. And actually, Malaysia did very well in emerging very well out of that crisis. What sort of crisis was it then, and how does it compare with now? Well, at that time, it was due to waves of capital outflows, and it happened over a period of time. It happened as a result of contagion of outflows in many of the countries in Southeast Asia and in Asia as well, Greater Asia, where we saw these outflows. And these outflows didn't happen just once in a discontinuous manner. It happened throughout the months and sporadic, and it led to collapse of our financial markets, capital markets, and the exchange rate collapsed in many countries in this region. And as a result of it, those holding financial assets began to became in distress. And then you had a financial crisis. And as the financial institutions stopped lending in that kind of environment, then you had an economic crisis. So it happened over a period of time. And when it happens that way, as a regulator and policy maker, you are forward-looking, and therefore you look at scenarios that could happen down the road, and you can implement policies to preempt what is happening. And that is exactly what Malaysia did. We restored stability in our financial markets and got quite criticized for the kind of policies that we took, described now as unconventional policies, but others have done that in their crises too. And so we dealt with stressed financial institutions, and they commenced lending, and as a result of that, we had a V-shaped recovery. Now, the economic contraction happened in 98, even though the waves of capital outflows happened in 97. 97, we still had a growth of 6-7%, but by the time it continued into 98, and when the banks stopped lending as a result of their financial stress, then that was the time when the economy started contracting, and the economy contracted by 7%. That was the first contraction, and I was acting governor at that time, and I had to make the announcement, the first time in our history. Now, how does it compare with now? Well, the economic contraction that is being projected for this year, and by aside even by Bank Negara, but the World Bank and the IMF, it is in the range of minus 3.5 to 5.5%. So the economic contraction, while very painful because it happened within a very short period of time in the first half of this year, is less than the contraction experienced during the Asian financial crisis 20 years ago. So in that sense, you're having a situation where the potential for recovery is from a less worse situation than previously. But perhaps maybe in this particular case, the unemployment might be higher.
Got it.
Yes. So this is why policy needs to recognize this and address this point. But in which case, I also want to make a point, because there are some multilateral agencies that have said countries like Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, or even in Asia in general, need to brace themselves for a financial crisis. This is not a financial crisis. This is an economic crisis.
All right.
And moreover, yes, the reasons that they gave is many businesses will not be able to service their loans, and then as a result, banks will suffer losses. Well, they need to recognize that after the Asian crisis, all of us in Asia, and in particular in Southeast Asia, strengthened our banking institutions through restructuring, rationalization, consolidation, and reforms, financial reforms, all of it which has strengthened. So our financial institutions go into this crisis from a position of strength, and therefore they are ready, able to absorb some of these setbacks. And I do not anticipate a financial crisis in which there's a disruption in lending, which would be vital for our economic recovery. So in essence, we have what, as an economist, we would describe good initial conditions. And one of them is a very strong, well-capitalized financial system, a banking system in particular, with their provisioning standards and their level of capitalization, their level of profitability before this crisis. So I'm one of the more optimistic ones that we are in store for a recovery at the second half of this year, and going into next year, where this recovery will strengthen. But all this is based on an assumption that we're not going to have a second wave.
All right, touch wood.
Yes.
Thank you, Tan Sri. I love that optimism. And you mentioned that the banking sector has strengthened after the financial crisis, and this being more of an economic crisis, government has done quite a bit in terms of combating and cushioning the impact of the economic downturn. There are Penjana and Prihatin initiatives. A huge amount of allocations has been put aside for the betterment and to increase consumer spending, as an example. I want to hear your thoughts and views on the work that has been done by the government. And I know that it will not have any quick wins or any immediate impact, but from a longer-term recovery process, linking it to your optimism that second half will be much better.
Yes. Well, the response to this current crisis, as we can describe it as, the first response has to be the health system and the containment of the spread of this pandemic. But in terms of the economic response, the traditional policies, that is the monetary and fiscal policies, we have seen that they have been very prompt. We have seen well, I'm a career central banker, and I will comment that from my entire experience, these interest rates now have been brought down to historical lows.
Wow.
We haven't seen this kind of level of interest rates, I believe. And so this is a rapid response and a prompt response to the current conditions, to make access to financing, and not only that, for existing borrowers to lower their cost of borrowing. And then of course you had the moratoriums and so on introduced to support and provide relief to existing borrowers. Then the fiscal policy, again, I've never seen it before as well. So this is historical highs of the fiscal stimulus, I think exceeding now 20% of GDP. And again, it has been very prompt and very quick to provide relief to households, to businesses, and to those industries who are most affected by this, especially services industries and so on, who've been affected by this consequence of this pandemic. And so they have done their part, and the most important part is the implementation of it, that it reaches out to those that require it, and the banks also provided is the channel through which borrowers are affected, and we have many other mechanisms to deal with debt restructuring and at the household level, at the SMEs, small businesses level, and to the large corporates. Those mechanisms exist. They were so successful during the Asian financial crisis 22 years ago that we kept it in our system, these mechanisms, all these mechanisms. We have a resolution authority with the Deposit Insurance Corporation, has all the Dana Harta, Dana Modal is all embedded in that authority now, so that they can be effectively implemented immediately, but with the loan restructuring. So Malaysia has always been dealing with the problem not only with the lender's side, like recapitalizing financial institutions as was done 22 years ago, or dealing with the financial institutions so that they continue to perform their function, but also at the borrower's side. So we have always been very extensive in our approach to policies. At this point, what I would like to see perhaps is more done with respect to unemployment. While of course it is businesses, when businesses recover they can re-employ or improve employment conditions, but there's one aspect that's particularly important, and the jobs might be different.
Yes.
And of course, coming for you from the technology side, you know the skills required are going to be very different. So there has to be a reform in the education system that will produce the kind of skills that is needed now for the structural changes that are in the making, and for those existing workforce, they need to be reskilled, retooled, and have new skill sets, really. And this has to be provided aggressively so that we have the right kind of talent and so that they can gain new employment.
You've led me to my third question, actually, with regards to being inclusive.
Yes.
And how technologies are playing bigger role right now in accelerating the economic recovery process.
Yes.
You know, the subject on employment.
Yes.
And how critical skill sets are changing right now.
Yes.
Your views and how technology plays that role,
Yes.
especially in the context of digital economy or sharing economy,
Yes.
in enabling people to address unemployment through various forms of other digital means and digital working opportunities.
Yes. Well, the fundamental idea of pushing for inclusion is that we want balanced growth. We've seen in some economies, especially that are IT driven, you know, you have very high rates of growth in that sector, racing ahead, whereas you have the other parts of the economy left behind. So overall, you have a great economic growth, but it's not balanced. What we want is balanced growth. And this, you've heard of digital divide and so on. This is something we don't like to see happen. So we need to have in place the potential for other parts of the economy to participate in this growth process. At Bank Negara Malaysia, of course, at the very early stage, when we rewrote our Central Banking Act, after 50 years of central banking, we actually rewrote the whole legislation. And at one time, when I was presenting this new legislation to the cabinet for their support, they did say to show line by line what are the differences. And I said, you can't do that, because I can take all the issues presented and what are not included and what are compared to the previous legislation. But the new legislation is a completely new for the change environment. And one of the new mandates that was articulated very clearly is that we wanted to build an inclusive and progressive financial system. And when you say inclusive financial system, that means everyone can participate or should be able to participate in the financial system, so that you can be brought through the financial sector into the economic mainstream and benefit from it. So financial inclusion for us has been a very important part of the agenda. And the next step to it is, of course, to rely on technology to achieve that, the outreach. Of course, we started off with a brick and mortar, having branches and agent banks who will go directly to the households and consumers. However, now the outreach is through technology, and the education with it comes to show people financial literacy. How do you use the financial system effectively? Now, in many senses, the first stage of it, we have achieved amazing results. Like 92% of our population have some form of banking account.
95%, such as the latest number from Bank Negara.
All right, that's even better.
It's even better.
Yes, it's closely having 100%.
Exactly.
Those were our ambitions. We are always very ambitious, so it's very exciting that such a high percentage. Therefore, actually, when you want to give relief to people, you can give it instantaneously, because you don't have to go around handing out the cash, which a lot of people wanted to do.
Yes, for different reasons.
Yes, because it's so ineffective.
Exactly.
Because people have to queue up, and then, so in this case, it's and it can be given periodically, rather than all at once, and then it's all spent, and then they don't have enough to see them throughout the weeks and months ahead. And so it's an effective way to just credit it to their accounts. So Malaysia already has in place to do this. We have the foundations to do it digitally. And then the communication, so it's the channel for the transactions, the channel for the communications. It's all there for the effective implementation of those policies digitally. And but, however, we mustn't be satisfied just having people included in the financial system through having an account. We need to be more ambitious than that. They need to manage their monies more effectively. What do? Should they just place their monies in deposits, or should they try to earn something through investment in other asset classes? And the insurance penetration rate, which is still low, should be much higher, and so on. So now the key word is effective participation in the financial system. And then you need businesses like micro enterprises, the small and medium scale enterprises, to be more effective in their utilization of financial services. And so financial inclusion is definitely an unfinished agenda.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's so much more that we need to do to make the participation more effective.
Got it. You mentioned about Malaysia has done pretty well when it comes to creating a bank populations. And as I said, latest numbers from Bank Negara has shown that we have hit 95%. How would you see, and you mentioned about beyond bank accounts,
Yes.
how would micro SMEs or a B40 be able to sustain their financial sustainability in looking into investing in various asset classes? Would digital, we are very familiar with solutions and offerings from the financial institutions, the insurance companies, the banks, the investment platforms. They are currently new sets of fintech companies
Yes.
that are offering similar solutions,
Yes.
and being able to enable that outreach even faster,
Right.
as they are looking into helping this underserved community in increasing investment opportunities,
Yes.
protecting themselves,
Yes.
and even more of other opportunities across the spectrum of financial services.
Right.
Your view on how would you see digital financial services companies play a role,
Right.
whether it's hand in hand with the financial institutions, or would you see that there could be some form of disruption happening later on?
Well, every aspect of digitalization is disruptive. And before pursuing that, I also do want to mention that when you talk about financial inclusion, one of the biggest success stories of this is in Kenya, where they have M-Pesa. And M-Pesa means, is from the Swahili word pasa as money, and M is mobile. And it was so successful in the outreach that transactions could be made using the mobile phone, and it penetrated far into the rural areas and so on, because everyone had a phone and they could transfer funds and receive monies for their products and so on through this mechanism. And I've talked to many people who know about this, and they actually said that it was successful in Kenya because it was initiated by the central bank. And it's also been replicated with many African countries. But a few other countries did try to implement this and were not successful. Why was it not successful? The uptake wasn't so significant. It is really about how it is being implemented in a comprehensive manner, and it also receives the assurances and confidence of the users that they have in the system. And I also want to mention that, like in Malaysia, you have like tabung haji, where it accumulates funds from those who want to perform the pilgrimage. And many have tried to replicate it outside the country. Now, apparently, there are some that are successful, but prior to that, they found great difficulty. So the implementation of this and what is actually being offered, and the education process, the infrastructure, and the confidence and trust in the system, in the integrity of the system, and knowing that there's some oversight of the system and accountability, all these aspects are very important in the system.
So switching gears from financial inclusions to, I think, a topic that's very dear to you, Islamic finance. Malaysia has long been recognized as a leader in Islamic finance, and very much due to your efforts, Tan Sri. However, this leadership somehow hasn't really rubbed its magic into building an innovative Islamic fintech industry. I mean, a lot of efforts are being put into building a robust industry around Islamic fintech. And I strongly feel that there's still a level playing field in the whole entire globe. Given our positions in Islamic finance, how can we leverage on the current strength that we have in building and stimulating an innovation, innovations in Islamic fintech?
Right. Well, just like the priorities given even in the traditional banking sector, the first building blocks of the Islamic financial system also had to be put in place, and priority was given to that first. To have the legislation in place took many years to give people confidence and predictability of the outcomes because of the uncertainty that prevailed, and then because it was something so new, and then to have all the building blocks, including the financial infrastructure, the financial markets, the sukuk market. We have one of the most developed in the world, and then the money market as well, so that liquidity can be managed, and then the talent with the expertise and the research to promote innovation. But while they haven't moved to that next phase, they have an opportunity with all these foundations strengthened. They can leapfrog and have a steep acceleration in the digitalization process to increase innovation in products offerings, to increase their operational efficiency, to increase their outreach in terms of channels that they have for Islamic finance. There's so many new opportunities. But one thing I'd like to say, that as you may be aware, that at the very beginning in the early 2000s, when we started with this development of this Islamic finance agenda in our domestic financial system, and then to expand it globally, we found that even within our system, the Sharia rulings was very divergent in views. And then even within the what we call Nusantara area in the region, there were also divergent interpretations, Sharia interpretations, and therefore we needed to work towards harmonizing in the region and then harmonizing globally. And when we set up and when we knew that our talent was also going to be poached, yes, because everyone else then wanted to be an international Islamic financial center, from the developed financial markets to markets in the Middle East and international financial centers like Hong Kong and Singapore and so on. And they looked at where the available talent was, and of course it was in Malaysia. So we said we had to produce a pipeline of talent for the global Islamic financial system. And now, as it happens, INSIEF, which is specialized to do this with the professional qualifications, they have about, well, they had on the average about 2,000 students, and from 80 over countries. And now many of the graduates, the 200-300 that graduate every year, are in key positions all throughout the world. But when we did this, we also wanted to encourage innovation, aside from convergence of Sharia rulings facilitating that. We also wanted to promote innovation in offerings by the Islamic financial industry. And so ISRA Research Academy, Sharia Research Academy, was also established within INSIEF. And they put onto a portal, I can't remember the year when it was, but it was many, many years ago, of all the Sharia rulings. So everyone became aware of it throughout the world. and and their research and the dialogues amongst Sharia scholars that were organized contributed to facilitating now more than 80 or 90% of the interpretations have reached some harmonization, which is amazing. But they use digitalization in having a portal and working with some of the networks, international networks that existed to establish these portals. And then in terms of their research, the outreach of their research, I believe now they are ranked something like 33rd in the world where their research is being tapped into. And this obviously can only be done digitally.
Exactly.
And so to be recognized in that way, they did leverage on technology. But I know what you're referring to is the digitalization of the operations of the industry. And this is something that I would also like to see happen, that they, just like their counterparts, and other industries that are similar to Islamic finance, like what we categorize as responsible forms of financial intermediation, like ethical finance and so on, they have leveraged on technology much faster, and their outreach has scaled up even faster, and therefore Islamic finance should endeavor to do this in their product offerings and in their channels of outreach for their financial services. And some of the categories of like zakat that is operated in our own country, zakat, wakaf, and sedekah, all lend themselves to leveraging on technology for greater efficiency in how it operates and the impact that it will have, not only in terms of its management of the funds, but in terms of its distributive effects.
Okay.
So this is something that we should look forward to.
I think we all look forward to
Yes.
and whole entire systems gets digitalized.
Yes.
The next questions will be more related to your current role as PMB chairman, or should I say chairwoman. This is about the fintech ecosystems and the role of government-linked investment companies such as PNB. Technology has always been seen as higher risk, and your views for GLICs, the likes of PNBs, in investing in the higher risk asset classes like tech startups?
Yes. Well, I strongly believe that tech startups should be supported, and they should be within any country, and we've seen it in some of our neighboring countries where these kind of startups have been well supported. It's the whole ecosystem and the infrastructure, the legislation and the institutional arrangements and the IT infrastructure within the country, the talent developed and so on. These are the things that the whole ecosystem is required to. For PNB, we only have one mandate, and it's the most amazing thing to me, because I come from an organization with, as a career central banker with multiple mandates, and we actually have to fight for our voice to be heard in the international environment, to tell everyone that we don't have a mandate just like some of the developed countries of a single mandate to rein in or to promote price stability, because there are many central banks that just have that single mandate. The US at least has the mandate also of employment and growth of the economy. But in Bank Negara, the mandate is very broad. But at PNB, we just have a single mandate, and that mandate is to enhance the wealth of our unit holders. So if the activity doesn't enhance the wealth of our unit holders, we shouldn't be involved in that. But that doesn't mean that we don't support digitalization. We should, and we do. We work with digitalized companies and to further our own agenda of inclusion and outreach, and then in the efficiency of how we conduct our investments and the operational efficiency of how we operate to achieve our mandate. And even within PNB, I'm really pleased to say that we are such an agile and flexible institution that even within this year that we adopt digitalization in 3 important areas, just this year alone. And of course, with the COVID pandemic, we wanted to ensure that our functioning in terms of our outreach to our unit holders, and we have 14 million unit holders.
I'm one of them.
Yes. And so our outreach to them, online transactions that could happen during the shutdown period and so on, continued because we had it already in place. Now, but to ensure our continued effective functioning, we had a change in working arrangements, work from home. And very quickly, 90% of our people worked from home, and to ensure the continued functioning of PNB. And PNB, I believe, has 1,600 staff, and so 90% of them actually worked from home for most of the shutdown period, and our without compromising the effective functioning of our operations. So that is very good indeed. Of course, we have continuity plans previously and all that, and they took effect as well. But so the first thing was working from home effectively. We showed the agility of the organization to leverage on technology to do that, obviously. And the second is we introduced a new product. And of course, you may know it, it's called RACE. And this was part of an innovation competition, internal one. So it was developed internally, and this staff won the competition for submitting the proposal for this product. Work together with another entity that has the expertise and proven track record. They've done it in Australia, and they've also done it actually in Indonesia. And so we worked with them. But it also took a long time. Between the time that we submitted this and won the prize for innovation, it took more than a year to our regulator, who went through and did the whole entire audit of the entire supply chain of the process. And we just launched it very recently. So we're very excited, and it's been well received by the market. So That's the second thing. And the third thing, I cannot say too much about it because it hasn't been officially announced.
Okay.
But what I can say, because a lot of people obviously know something generally about it, is that for 20 years, PNB had Minggu Saham, and every year we would have it. It would be 1 week of in-person fair, whereby all our strategic companies would set up booths, and during that week, more than 100,000 people would come in person, and there would be competitions and so on, for them to gain knowledge about how to invest in unit trusts and what kind of funds we have according to their different risk appetite, and how they would go about it, and they would also know about where we invest their monies and so on. So there was a great discussion after 20 years of doing this and having a great response of in-person response. The suggestion was that we would do it digitally, and we would. So there was a lot of discussion, and there were two views on it. But the view that it should be done digitally won the day.
Okay.
Thank goodness, because with this COVID
Exactly.
that happened afterwards, there was no way that we could have it in person. So we had already decided before the COVID pandemic that we would do it digitally. And in fact, today, later this afternoon, I'm going to be briefed on the final aspects of this endeavor, which is going to happen later in the year. And soon after, there will be an announcement. All I can say is that it'll be 1 week of great excitement of digital
Minggu Saham.
Yes. The details of which you will learn later.
We look forward to it, actually.
Yes. Yes.
You know, we spoke so much about accessibility.
Yes.
We were pleasantly surprised as well. Recently, we had a sessions for the micro SMEs
Yes.
in upgrading their skills with regards to digitalization, and it was a pleasant surprise that it was very well received.
Yes.
That there was this urgency for them to be learning new skills,
Yes.
and understanding why, and having this understanding why digital is crucial in helping them to grow bigger. Switching the gear a bit again, Tan Sri, this is quite a sensational topic on digital banks.
Yes.
The release of Bank Negara Malaysia's exposure draft on licensing framework for digital banks.
Yes.
I foresee this as one of the biggest disruptions.
Yes.
If not this year, I mean, there's a lot of disruptions happening this year.
Yes.
But at least in the decade, yeah?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on digital banking, and what kind of repercussions that would happen? Or would it benefit the financial institutions? And eventually, would it benefit consumers like me?
Right. Of course, digital banking can also be done by the incumbents because they have already, over the years, started with internet banking and then greater outreach, leveraging more and more with digitalization. Some less and some more digitalized than others. And then what is also important is some have been more supportive of companies, startups, which is also very important. So this change has already been evolved, but this digital bank and the potential for new licenses in this respect, of course, it will be competition to the incumbents, and it all depends in their ability to access the market, give offerings that there is a demand for, because as I gave the example earlier in Kenya, where it's very successful, and then some other, and many African countries, but there are a few and I won't name the actual countries, where the take-up rate wasn't there. So for the take-up rate to happen, there needs to be first, their offerings have to be competitive, cost-effective, and that will be a factor. It's just like Islamic finance. When we offered it, we can tell the world that Islamic finance is able to meet with the demands that the economies have, that the requirements, and Islamic finance is able to meet these requirements, and not only that, but at cost-effective weather. And that is how Islamic finance has been sustainable. And the same thing for these digital banks. They have to be able to meet the requirements. That means the demands of businesses, the demands of households, what kind of financial demands do they need to fulfill, whether it's access or whatever product offerings they have, and the speed at which they can provide it, that there are not long delays as compared to slow moving, maybe that happens when it's in person, or when you have signatures of documents and filling of forms.
KYC process.
Yes, and so on. To know your customer, but you have to also provide confidence in the integrity of the system. That, in other words, the system is not going to be vulnerable by fraud or insecurity, or it's not. So one is that it's got the confidence in terms of that nobody could hack into your account and take your monies and so on, that there's not going to be fraud. And then the second one also, that is not going to be vulnerable to money laundering. And so all these have to be in place for it to take off. And for me, who was involved in putting all the building blocks in place for Islamic finance, conventional finance, I know that is a uphill task to have all this in place for digital banking to succeed. And then you've got the oversight of the regulator. That's also very assuring. For example, like PNB, we have the Securities Commission as our regulator. And like initially, for example, an institution like Tabung Haji didn't have a regulator, but I believe now they do. I'm not quite sure whether it's a joint regulator or a single regulator, but it's important to have another pair of eyes aside from your own governance process where you have a board oversight. And then there has to be the education process and the talent available to take this through as well, and to see it scale up, because you definitely need in order to succeed.
We are at the tail end of the discussion.
Yes.
Maybe I'll pose you a question. Hopefully we would have some time to discuss more on something that is impactful to you. Is there an impact area that you would want to see faster track of adoption in Malaysia, whether it's on healthcare or education? What is one area to you that you would see?
Yes.
Do you want the adoptions to become faster?
Yes. Well, of course, most of my life have been for the financial sector, and we wanted to build a financial system that best serves Malaysians. We didn't look forward to becoming an international financial center. We just wanted a financial center, the sector that best serves our Malaysian community. But now, having gone through 2 master plans over 20 years, we actually have emerged quite well to have one of the best financial systems. So what else do I look forward to? Of course, having a health system and is leveraged on technology and is very important. Like in this COVID environment, contact tracing and all the aspects of information diagnosis and sharing of information and research on even how to cure. It can be cured much faster now with the sharing of information globally and so on. But the other aspect that I believe opens the door and deals with most of our major problems is education, education, and education. And part of my life is now being devoted to that aspect. And also, I cannot announce now, but one project that we are working on, and inshallah, that we will have a chance of realizing it soon. We've been working on it for 2 years almost, and it requires a lot of perseverance and defying all odds. It is feeding every child with a nutritious meal at primary school level, which involves 2.7 million children. And you'll be pleased to know that it's going to leverage on technology. It's going to leverage on a blockchain-enabled platform to achieve this. And we have 3 objectives. One is to enhance the health of the children so that they're more resilient to illnesses. Second is to build their physical frame because we've been known in our country to have very high percentage of small framed, and this was true in Japan and Korea, and now you see that people are tall and broad built frames. It's because they feed the children the right food at the initial stage of their life. And the third thing is to develop their cognitive development, so that they'll be smarter and their brain will receive food that will contribute to the development of their brain. And so this is a high impact if it succeeds.
Inshallah.
Yes, inshallah. It's a high impact. It will affect a generation, our future generation. In supporting the education as well.
I'm assuming when it's launched, and it will require a lot more participations from corporates, industries, even people at large will be able to contribute as well.
Yes, and because it's a blockchain-enabled platform, they will know how every cent is spent, because they will also know from the whole supply chain of providing the food for the child, the food producer, the people who prepare the food, right up to when the food enters the mouth of the child. And so there's a high degree of transparency, as you would know, from this kind of technology to achieve those objectives. So we have already garnered a lot of interest from corporates throughout the country, actually, and we've been talking to them for more than a year, and we're quite close to coming up with something. So when we do that, organizations like yourselves would help us to disseminate the information.
Exactly, and I'm sure that the blockchain community will, upon hearing this, this is music to their ears.
Yes.
Tan Sri, that brings us to the end of ORBIT Talk series.
Yes.
It has been a great 1 hour. I've been informed that there are more people watching us right now. I think the latest number was more than 300.
Yes.
I've been very delighted, having these conversations with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Dr. Zeti Aziz. Thank you, Tan Sri.
Thank you.